Elsewhere, this is a story that is really driving me a bit batty because it is ending exactly how I expected. You've seen over the past couple of weeks, about a week and a half, riots in the UK. Now, this happened after the murder of 3 young girls, and they were at some sort of dance party, and it was, Taylor Swift themed, and a 17-year-old kid who was the son of Rwandan immigrants, he was himself born in the UK, was the perpetrator. Now, a lot of misinformation went out that it was a Muslim immigrant that did this. And, this is in an area that saw in Manchester in 2017 the horrific attack on an Ariana Grande concert. And this is it again. This is what people are thinking. And that turned out not to be true. Now, a lot of people have gone online and amplified a lot of this nonsense, including Elon Musk, who said, this is the beginning of a civil war. So let's look at this and see if this looks like a civil war. This is a protest from South Yorkshire. Well, I misspoke on the way into that. I said that was a protest. That was not a protest. That was a riot. And there have been hundreds of other smaller anti-immigration and anti-immigrant protests in the past couple of days. And they've been met with some counter-protesters. And this is in Walthamstow? I thought I said Walthamstown, these silly British names. Walthamstow. This is a real place. This is a counter-protest. What were they chanting there? It sounded like they were saying Palestine. Yeah. Okay. The problem with this stuff is Europe. And I apologize to our European listeners, readers, and now viewers. The response to this has been, of course, government intervention and, threats to crack down on civil liberties. Keir Starmer, the new prime minister, says that live facial recognition is in the offing. I recall writing a story a long time ago about all of the surveillance cameras that went up in the UK in George Orwell Square. That's actually true. So we are seeing now the return of a counter disinformation unit, things that are very, very skilled at themselves, perpetrating disinformation on the people. And there has been arrests. So this is, and I'm not kidding, by the way. If you want to look at this on X, you will find a lot of videos of this, of people who have been tweeting. This is not uncommon in the UK. There is no right to freedom of speech. They have been saying things that these aren't true. We don't believe that they're true. What you're saying about the riots, what you're saying about what precipitated the riots, and people are being arrested. Not uncommon. Rupa. Mm-hmm. Again, Canada, it's, you have the queen on your money. So you must have amazingly sharp opinions on this. What do you make of this? I mean, the crackdown was kind of inevitable. Do you think that the sort of uprising itself, and I hate using that word because it sounds like it's a glorious thing. It is not. It is an inglorious thing. Mm. But do you think this was sort of inevitable? Because that's what you get in things like Elon Musk tweet, UK policy, immigration policy, et cetera, which drove much of the Brexit campaign, is necessarily precipitating these types of riots.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredibly complex issue. The mass immigration of open borders certainly has been an issue for a very long time. And I think, it's everything. It's Brexit. It's outsourcing of jobs. It's, it's economic decline. It's all of those things. And it came to a boiling point, and this is where we're at now, over the murder of 3 young girls by a British citizen, someone who was born and raised there. So he was not an illegal migrant. He happens to be Black, but he's not Muslim. and it's just boiled over into this. But the response to this by the state has been extraordinary. But I have to admit that it fully expected, actually.
Yeah.
So when we talk about facial recognition in the UK, that's not new. We're talking about it now as though it's a new thing, but it's been around for a very long time. It's been around at least since 2015, where police forces use this surveillance to scan hundreds of thousands of faces at protests, sporting events, concerts, train stations, so on and so forth. But its use has been ramped up quite recently. And this is very intrusive and very problematic, and a violation of privacy and human rights. And the UK, again, it's good to remind ourselves of the fact that in other countries that are not the US, the constitutional protections for free speech are extremely weak. So the police can actually scan hundreds of thousands of faces in a crowd and use that information to go after you. Now, this facial recognition tool has been fraught with all kinds of problems. All kinds of false arrests have been made. People have been misidentified. Lives have been ruined. So, this is deeply problematic. But the UK has been on this path for a very, very long time. Do you know that they have an online harms legislation, which means that if you take to social media and say that trans women are men, that can get the cops to knock on your door.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of other things that are brewing right now. So under the previous Conservative Party, there was a pressure to adopt a broad definition of Islamophobia as a type of racism that targets expressions of or perceived Muslimness. Now, other parties in the UK have adopted this definition. And this is a very legitimate worry in the UK, that it's only a matter of time that Keir Starmer's Labour government codifies this definition into legislation.
Yeah, Coleman, look, there's been a number of people that I think that you and I actually personally know that have been critical of immigration. They've been critical of sort of, what used to be called the sort of multicultural policy of the United Kingdom, who have themselves come out after this and said, what is wrong with you people? And they're addressing these kind of thick-necked, bald EDL kind of neo-Nazi types, and there's a surprising number of them. But what I think that does, in a way, and tell me if I'm wrong in being a nightmarish person for suggesting such a thing, but it does. You have a problem that actually exists that is now being sort of ignored because these psychos are doing psychopathic things, and they are correct. And they are not, it is correct that they are psychopathic and doing psychopathic things. They were precipitated by something that is a lie. It was not but that issue, the one that agitates these people, is that not a real issue? I mean, is that not something that has to be addressed in the UK? And there's been, since 1989, I mean, February of 1989, when the Satanic Verses came out, and you saw in Bradford and places like this, people, I mean, God, Cat Stevens, the former singer, came out and said, Salman Rushdie is being burned in effigy. And he said, it's too bad it's not the real thing. I mean, there's been a strain of this in the UK for a very long time. If we just forget just for a minute, just for a thought experiment, the nutbags on the street that are looting stores, I mean, is there something that the new Labour government has to deal with? And it's, integration and immigration.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's been arguably the number one issue in the UK for the past 8 or 9 years, arguably longer. The way that, London has transformed, the demographics of London transformed so rapidly. And, I live in New York. It's a very diverse city. I think diversity is a good thing. When it's reached by a process that has the consent of the governed, essentially, right? At a pace that people are comfortable with. I mean, that's just a fact. It's human nature that people don't want things to change too fast, and that's not going to go away. You can't stamp out human nature. And the fact that, London is majority minority as quickly as that happened, and that you've also got all immigrants coming from a vastly different culture, a different religion as well. which is not necessarily the case with migration in America.
Correct.
Where even though we have like huge flows, there's less cultural distance between like the average Catholic coming over the border from Mexico, and therefore less discord. There's less of a gap to be bridged. And this is a huge problem. I mean, it's a massive problem. I think a lot of British people feel that they voted to leave the EU almost exclusively because of this, really. And they basically got the same policy that they had before they left the EU. So it's like, yeah, it's absolutely a powder keg. And I don't want to excuse any of the psychos doing crazy, violent things right now. I want to be clear about that. But the underlying issue is absolutely the fault of like a decade or more of bad policy, of too permissive immigration policy over and above the will of the people.
Batya, you know, there's a thing that always bothers me about this, and it's repeated everywhere across the globe, and no one ever really pays attention to this. It's almost like, you know, the slavery debate we have in the United States about our original sin and our guilt, without ever acknowledging that it has been a global phenomenon, and it's not just the unique kind of precinct of the United States. The same thing is true with like anti-immigration sentiment. It is everywhere. Every time somebody crosses a border. I mean, Rupa, you can join in this, because 400,000 or 40,000 Rohingya coming in, very upset, you know, a lot of people in India, and there's been some criticism of that. Venezuelans in Colombia. This is the same thing is true in Africa, when there's African countries that are, you know, civil wars and they spill out. There's always that thing. It always exists. When it happens in the UK, or it happens in Germany and France, and again, as Coleman points out, this is a very extreme manifestation of that, and it has to be condemned, and these people are absolute scumbags. But those who are just trying to have a debate about this, I mean, it just seems to me that it's kind of a natural debate to have, a normal debate to have, that has been kind of put off into this place that, yeah, don't really talk about that. It's impolite.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Michael. Like here in Canada, where I live, we're having a similar debate here, talking about immigration, or saying that you opposed, wanted a moratorium on immigration, or you wanted to put limits on immigration, would have been you would have been described as far right or a neo-Nazi, 4 years ago. But people now, the mainstream media, the legacy media, is writing about this, because here's what's happening in this country. And most new immigrants have come in from my home country, from my original home country, India, and it's created a real crisis in the housing market. And per capita GDP has gone down as a result. So there are some real issues here, and people are finally starting to talk about immigration. Obviously, I have no time for the racists who lump everybody. They'll fixate on one group of immigrants for everything, while ignoring everything else. The larger problems with immigration. But I think we're finally starting to have this conversation. But to the point about the UK versus the US, there are two different types of it's the melting pot versus assimilation. In the US, you're American first. In the UK, you are Muslim first, you are Bangladeshi first, you're Indian first, and then you're British. And so that is a fundamental problem that plagues the European countries, and the UK especially, whereas that's not the kind of problem that we have in the US, but we certainly have that problem here in Canada.
I support immigration to Canada because it gave us Rupa with tight immigration. We get no Rupa. Amen to Rupa. Batya, any closing thoughts of why immigration has to be shut down all over the world? Whatever your position. I don't know what your position is.
I'm going to make a couple points and then we'll wrap it up. The first is adding to the, this is not about the racist, this is about the immigration conversation, but adding the insult to injury is the fact that the people who set the policy are in the class that benefits in very real economic terms from mass immigration, because they are the consumers of low-wage labor. And so you have people who are part of the elites setting policy in which it is basically wage theft of their working class neighbors, and then they call them racist if they object. Now, of course, in the UK, they actually are racist in these videos. And I have to say, my reaction to these videos, they made me feel even more rabidly patriotic than I already am, because these scenes are unimaginable in the United States.
They are, aren't they? I mean, I was thinking the same thing.
Here about immigration, the idea that they would organize a mob and start attacking random Hispanic people in the streets, it is unimaginable. The idea that an American citizen, because of the color of their skin, would then be considered an immigrant is unimaginable. And we have a part of our country that is heavily armed and very angry about immigration, and we would never see anything like that, because this is the greatest country on earth. And I apologize to all of the amazing Free Press viewers from around the globe. I apologize to you, Rupa, but you know that I feel so much pride in my country and my nation watching these videos, because they are so alien, even though we are also experiencing the debate and are very upset about it. So wanted to get that off my chest.
That is quite an end in the most jingoistic Lee Greenwood way I've ever heard, Batya. Good Lord.
I love America, for the record, and God bless America.
It's not a McCarthyite trial, Rupa. You don't have to say that, right? We're not going to take away your loyalty card or anything. But I will say one final point before you send us out of here, Batya. I mean, it is true, and people who have any doubt about this, the racist component of it, it wasn't a Muslim and it wasn't an immigrant, but they did find out that he was black and his parents were immigrants. And that was a motivating factor. I mean, look, they didn't back down after that and say, oh shit, we really messed it up. They said, well, yeah, but the parents shouldn't be here. And that's not something I think that you would see in the US. I think you're right about that.